Your deck is soft under your boot again. 6 years old. You spent $400 on sealant that promised 10. The wood underneath is already gray, already splitting, already breathing in the next frost. Frontier settlers in the Ozark Hills solved this in 1 pantry oil, 11 cents a board foot, 20 minutes of work. Stay with me because what I found proves they were right and we were sold something worse. The first time I drove out to Baxter County, Arkansas, I wasn't looking for oil. I was looking for barn joints that don't rot, the kind builders don't cut anymore. That's where I met Walt Pruitt, 78 years old, standing under a barn his great-grandfather raised. He ran his palm across a beam and told me it had never once been resealed. Not once, not in over 100 years of Ozark winters. He said his family used the pantry oil, nothing bought, nothing branded, nothing with a label. I asked him what that meant and he just smiled and told me to come back the next morning. I didn't understand what he was showing me until I started digging deeper on my own. I pulled old farm records, county histories, anything I could find on how these families actually maintained their buildings. And when I found what I found, you'll understand exactly why what I'm about to show you matters. Because it isn't a trick, it's a habit we quietly abandoned. If you want the archive pulled apart before anyone else finds it, hit subscribe now. Here's what the big box store never tells you. Most modern deck sealants are film forming. They sit on top of the wood like a raincoat. And a raincoat with one tier lets in everything, all at once, right where it's weakest. The average homeowner ends up reapplying sealant every 2 to 3 years, somewhere between $300 and $600 a job, sometimes more if a contractor's doing it. That's not protection, that's a subscription you didn't know you signed up for. But here's what frontier families never did. They never sealed the surface and walked away. They fed the wood slowly and let it decide when it needed more. And that's the reason their barns are still standing 100 years later, while our decks fail before the mortgage does. Nobody's out there stripping and recoating a homestead barn every spring. It just keeps going, quietly the way it always did. The forgotten method is boiled linseed oil, pressed from flax, the same crop pioneer families grew for cloth and cooking long before it ever touched a piece of wood. Instead of coating the wood, it soaks into it, hardens inside the fibers, and pushes moisture out from within rather than fighting to keep it out from above. It doesn't peel because there's nothing sitting on the surface to peel in the first place, and there's no thin layer waiting to crack the first time the temperature swings. A field study conducted by USDA Forest Service researchers at the Forest Products Laboratory found that wood treated with linseed oil showed added protection against termite and decay attack compared to untreated wood based on 5 years of exposure testing, source PMC/National Library of Medicine. 5 years outdoors in real ground contact conditions, not a lab shelf, not a controlled chamber, but dirt, rain, and insects doing exactly what they do to your fence post or your porch step. Think of it the way you'd think about oiling a cast iron pan instead of wrapping it in plastic wrap. One protects from the inside permanently, getting better with each use instead of worse. The other just delays the inevitable and eventually fails all at once, usually right when you need it most. When I asked Walt why it worked, he didn't reach for a textbook, he just said it plainly. Wood don't rot from the top. It rots from thirsty wood pulling water in. You feed it first, it's never thirsty. That single sentence explained more than anything I'd read in months of digging, and now there's a federal research lab quietly backing up what he already knew from watching his own barn for 70 years. It isn't a coating philosophy. It's a feeding philosophy. Treat the wood like it's alive because in a sense, it still behaves like it is, still pulling in whatever's around it, still responding to what you give it long after you've walked away and forgotten you ever touched it. There's a reason nobody told you this. Coatings manufacturers profit from repeat purchases. A finish that lasts one season outsells a finish that lasts a decade every single time. And that's simply how the business is built from the ground up. There's no incentive anywhere in that supply chain to sell you something that only needs to be bought once in your lifetime. Big box retailers profit from shelf space dedicated to premium weatherproofing systems, priced 3 to 4 times higher than raw linseed oil, packaged in sleek bottles with technical sounding names to look more advanced than they actually are. Half of what you're paying for is the label, not the chemistry inside it. And contractors profit from callback jobs. Resealing a deck is recurring revenue, not a one-time service, and recurring revenue is what keeps a business afloat season after season. A contractor who fixes your wood permanently on the first visit doesn't get a call back next spring, and that's simply not a sustainable model for someone running a business. It is not a conspiracy, it is worse than that. A conspiracy you can fight, expose, and take to court. A system you cannot see is harder to fight because it just feels like the way things are, like it's simply normal for wood to fail this fast, like that's just what wood does now. It isn't normal, it's profitable. Somewhere along the way, an entire generation stopped asking why their grandparents' barns outlasted their own decks, because the answer was inconvenient for an entire industry built around the opposite outcome. Nobody sat in a boardroom and decided to erase this knowledge on purpose. It simply became more profitable for everyone downstream if you forgot it, and forgetting was easier than questioning why a sealant that costs 4 times as much somehow lasts a fraction as long. That's the part that should bother you more than any conspiracy ever could, because at least a conspiracy has someone to blame. This is just quiet, ordinary business, and it's been working exactly as designed for decades. You can do this yourself this weekend. No special skill required and no contractor necessary. Buy 1 quart of pure boiled linseed oil from the paint aisle of any hardware store, under $10, and make sure the label says pure or boiled, nothing blended with synthetic additives you don't need. Clean the wood and let it dry completely. No water left sitting in the grain, because trapped moisture underneath the oil defeats the entire purpose of feeding the wood in the first place. Apply the oil with a plain rag, working with the grain in thin, even coats, not thick puddles that pool in the corners and never fully soak in. Wait 24 hours, then wipe off anything that hasn't soaked in. This step matters more than people think, because leftover oil left sitting on the surface can turn gummy, attract dust, and leave a tacky film instead of a clean-fed finish. Total setup time is under an hour, start to finish, including cleanup. Total cost is under $10 for a project that would otherwise run you hundreds through a contractor. Here's what you'll notice week by week if you're paying attention the way Walt's family always did. Week 1, the wood darkens slightly and the grain visibly tightens, almost like it's exhaling. Week 2, water starts beating on the surface instead of soaking straight in, which is the clearest sign the fibers are doing their job. By week 4, the wood feels different under your palm entirely. Dense, closed, no longer thirsty, no longer pulling at whatever touches it. That's not a guess or a feeling. That's the wood telling you, in the only language it has, that it's finally been fed properly, instead of just painted over one more time. Now for the piece I promised you at the very beginning. Buried in old rural farm records among agricultural bulletins written decades before synthetic sealants ever existed, there's documentation of exactly this practice: linseed oil treatments used across Ozark and Appalachian homesteads for barns, tool handles, fence posts, and porch boards, written in the plain, practical language of people who had no reason to exaggerate what worked. What struck me wasn't the method itself, since I'd already seen it standing in Walt's barn. It was what the old records didn't say. They didn't recommend a reapplication schedule measured in years, the way every modern product label does today, printed on the back of a can as if wood everywhere behaves identically regardless of climate, sun exposure, or use. They described wood being fed seasonally as needed, based entirely on how the boards looked and felt to the person maintaining them, a judgment call, not a countdown timer. That's the piece we quietly lost somewhere between then and now. Wood care used to be judged by the wood itself, by touch and by sight, not by an expiration date printed on a can designed to get you back in the store. Walt's family never needed a calendar reminder taped to the pantry door. They just knew, because they were paying attention to the one thing that actually mattered, the wood in front of them, not a schedule dictated by someone who'd never see their barn in person. That's the real difference between then and now. It was never about having access to a better product. It was about paying closer attention to a simpler one, season after season, generation after generation, until the habit became so ordinary, nobody thought to write it down as anything special. It was just how you took care of what you owned. Does it actually hold up outdoors, or is this just an indoor trick that only works on furniture? Yes, it holds up outdoors because it's penetrating into the wood itself, not sitting exposed on top where UV rays and driving rain attack first and hardest, wearing down whatever's sitting on the surface within a season or two. The oil is inside the fibers, not floating above them waiting to be stripped away by weather. My deck is pressure treated. Is this different for me, or does this only work on old barn wood? It still works fine on pressure-treated lumber. You just want to clean the surface thoroughly first, since treated wood tends to hold factory residue that can block proper absorption if you skip that step. Give it that one extra pass and it soaks in exactly the same way. My contractor told me this is old-fashioned and won't last as long as a real sealant, so why bother? Of course he'd say that. Contractors sell coatings with a markup built in, and raw linseed oil has no markup for anyone to sell you, which means there's simply no financial reason for him to recommend it over what's already sitting on his truck. If you're still not sure, and that's completely fair, don't redo your whole deck based on one video. Try it on a single board first, somewhere out of the way, and watch how it behaves through the next hard rain, through the next month of sun, through the next season entirely. Let the wood answer the question instead of taking my word for it. It's a slower kind of proof, but it's the only kind that's ever actually mattered out here. You didn't lose this knowledge, it was taken from you. One product upsell at a time, one shortened warranty at a time, one generation quietly convinced that feeding wood sounds stranger than buying a can off a shelf. There's a group of us now, most of us tired of the same story, done paying to solve problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. So tell me in the comments, what's the first piece of wood on your property you're going to feed instead of coat this weekend? I read every answer and honestly, they're what keep me digging. If this saved you a trip back to the hardware store, subscribe. There's a whole shelf of forgotten homestead knowledge still waiting to be pulled back out into the light. Coming up, I'm following a lead on how Depression-era families kept a kitchen warm through January without burning through a season's worth of firewood by Thanksgiving. It's a smaller fix than you'd think, and it's sitting in a bulletin most people have never opened. Bring a coat and meet me by the woodpile.